A warm welcome. A warm welcome to the sneak preview of the EORace Toolkit. My name is Delali Keme and I will be your MC for today. I work with the Geo Secretariat as the DR consultant supporting the DR working group. So just before we go any further, I would like to talk about the features of this AirMeet platform. The first thing I would like to draw your attention to is the fact that on the left there's a yellow, there's a round button on the left where you can be able to react to the presentations being made. And on the right, you can raise your hands if you want to speak live in the discussion session, then you'll be brought to the stage. On the right of your screen, there is a chat section where you can communicate directly with speakers and fellow participants. And further to your right, there's a Q&A section where you can ask your questions whilst the presentation is going on. We also have the poll feature, which will be launched right now just to demonstrate the poll feature function. Can you please launch the poll? So you should see on your screen right now a poll question about which parts of the world you are currently joining us from. Now to the purpose of this side event. This side event is to inform the GEO community about the ongoing development efforts of developing the toolkit by the working group, the DR working group. The aim is to get feedback from the participants of this meeting about tools and services that are coming out of the GEO working program that are either available or in development. To help us achieve our aim, we'll be having 3 presentations to introduce the GeoDR working group, as well as highlight the UNDR graph and a further insight into the EORace toolkit. Then we would end the session by having a guided audience feedback session. To take the next part of this event is Rui Kotani. Rui Kotani is the DRX, the Disaster Risk Reduction Coordinator, who is seconded from the government of Japan to the Geo Secretariat. Rui, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Dali. So I'm giving a quick sorry, I don't have my camera on. Okay, here we go. So I'm just giving a quick introduction of the GeoDR working group and the toolkit based on the presentations that was made by Kine yesterday in plenary session 3. I don't know if how many of you have attended that session yesterday. See. DR working group was established to develop and implement a coherent and cross-cutting approach within GEO in terms of Earth observations for DRR. Our task is to coordinate DRR-related activities across the GEO work program so that we can work together effectively to improve our ability to address DRR and ultimately support countries to embark on risk and climate resilient development pathways. The working group serves as a primary GEO liaison to UNDRR. We have approximately 100 members nominated by the GEO member countries and organizations. So our working group has 3 subgroups, each of them led by 3 co-chairs who will be speaking after me. Subgroup 1 is coordinated. It's coordinating with the GeoWork program, and it's leading and orchestrating the development of this toolkit. The other 2 subgroups are basically looking into contents. So subgroup 2 focuses on UNDR coordination for Sendai framework. Subgroup 3 focuses on climate change and SDG coordination. And everything is interconnected, so we will all work together anyway. So let me just quickly explain what the EO risk toolkit that we're working, our working group is developing with the UNDR and ESRI and other strategic partners. And so the toolkit aims to provide the DRR users with access to open source Earth observations, tools, and services to fill knowledge gaps on hazard, vulnerabilities, and exposure at the national level in developing countries. What we mean by users are those working in the national and local disaster management authorities, development and humanitarian actors, and Sendai focal points, so that the EO tools can help their policymaking operations and project implementations. We want to produce the contents of the toolkit that are useful for these users in their decision making. So, for example, on uptake of funding of EO tools and services, that they can have options to better use them in addressing DRR. So our strategic partners, such as the UNDR, are they are the key in reaching out to these potential users of the EO products, in our opinion. So our work is closely aligned with the UNDR flagship initiative called Global Risk Assessment Framework, or GRAPH. Short name is GRAPH. The GRAPH will be explained by Andrew in depth later after me, but it pays close attention to interconnected and systemic risk. So that includes like hazard, vulnerabilities, exposures impacted by climate change, for example. So, for example, sea level rise, gets worsened by climate change, and that increases the risk of flooding and tsunamis in coastal areas and cities. Climate change impacts that increase the risk of hot, dry weather favoring wildfires, and that increase more of the CO2 emissions, that kind of thing. So working with the GRAPH team led by Andrew, we hope to share readily available EO tools and services for countries such as those selected as GRAPH pilot countries. The GRAPH pilot countries are the least developed countries, LDCs, small island developing countries, SIDS, and other countries that are vulnerable to the loss and damage. So GRAPH is designed to help potential EO product users, and who are not only the host country governments and their line ministries, but this is to us very important that the GRAPH is supposed to help the UN agencies like the UNDP and OCHA, who are operating in the countries to run development and humanitarian operations. So we can reach out not only to the governments, but the UN agencies working in these countries. So that's pretty much it for me. Sorry, I forgot to turn this slide. So let me just, before giving mic to Andrew to speak about GRAPH and its country needs, let me ask those of you in the audience to who you are, using the poll once again. So you got the first questions. So let me publish Diali, can you publish the second and third and fourth and fifth?
Sure, I can do that.
So yeah, you can see on the screen, the poll asks, it lists up the countries, the GRAPH pilot countries and their candidates. They're candidates, so we're not sure for certain, and also small island countries and etc. So you can answer the polls while listening to Andrew and Dave. And if you have any questions, please do ask in the Q&A box, so we can answer them, in writing, or we can, answer them verbally if it's a complicated answer after 3 presentations. after me and Dave. So thank you. And Delhi, do you want to introduce Andrew?
Yes, thank you so much, Rin. I'll now like to introduce Andrew Spisoka, who is the Program Management Officer working with UNDRR. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to colleagues who are joining us. It's my pleasure to represent the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and to share with you during this session an overview of both the Global Risk Assessment Framework, as Rui mentioned, one of the flagship initiatives that emerged out of the Global Assessment Report 2019, particularly Chapter 2, with its focus on the increasingly systemic nature of risk. I don't think colleagues need to be reminded. The global pandemic is certainly an example of a global shock that is reverberating across multiple systems, impacting on trade, on supply chains, on health systems, happening at the same time as the climate crisis. The global chapter on systemic risk really underscored the need to support UN member states to transition from what has been largely a classical hazard by hazard risk assessment approach to look at the increasingly interconnectedness of risk. And the graph is really UNDRR's global offer to both UN member states and the UN system and to the broader partnership landscape to support a better understanding of interconnected and systemic risk. Let me just quickly on this slide give you an overview of the four pillars of graph. The first is really to recognize that a lot of member states are still, notwithstanding the evolution of artificial intelligence, machine learning. There's a lot of risk information out there. A lot of UN member states still have difficulty accessing it. That information is largely siloed in different sector ministries. And there's a scope to improve how risk information is actually applied for risk-informed development and humanitarian planning. So the first pillar of GRAPH is really around supporting UN member states to improve access to that risk information. And then based on that, once they have a view of the risk landscape, and as we all know, it's shifting in the country context where we see climate change accelerating hazards across the world. Pillar two is very much then around supporting member states to undertake bespoke risk analytics. So if it's a question, say, for example, on climate-induced internal displacement, or it's a question around how heat stress is affecting agriculture productivity, or it's a risk question around um, how environmental degradation is impacting on flood risk. Pillar two of GRAPH is set up as a technical assistance facility where UNDRR provides both financial and technical support through our global network of risk practitioners to make available the best the best risk science to UN member states. The third pillar is really around supporting um, national authorities, national partners, and here it's not just the national disaster management agencies. Increasingly, the context of interconnected and systemic risk argues that we engage transversely across multiple sectors, looking at multiple hazards as they impact and cascade and reverberate across multiple um, economies or layers of socioeconomic impact. So a lot of the support for capacity building is to first lay that seed about what we mean by interconnected and systemic risk, recognizing that UN member states are at different stages of their DRR practice, and the move by UNDRR to now look at a more complex um, thematic of systemic risk will take some time to bring UN member states and to evolve the practice both methodologically. How do we look at moving from what has been a focus on direct or primary loss and data from a hazard event to actually looking at secondary, tertiary impacts as a shock cascades and the impact chain works its way through different systems of a society. And so pillar 3 is very much around tackling that challenge. Pillar 4 is around strengthening networks for systemic risk reduction. Here we've commissioned as UNDR a lot of work to strengthen the conceptual base for systemic risk assessment. That's an evolving practice. You will see in GAR 2022, released next year, that systemic risk is very much still the focus of that global report. And what we're proposing also with the global platform in May of next year, again, a focus on how we can support the international community to pivot towards more political, technical research attention on challenges around systemic risk. Next slide, please. But what I want to focus on with the time I have available is on the first pillar of GRAPH. And the first pillar, as I mentioned, is really around strengthening access to risk information, putting the progenitors of risk information and the global community and network of data and risk information providers to national users and subnational users. And so we have, as at UNDRR, started this initiative to aggregate risk information focused this year on 7 countries. Those countries are Fiji, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Eswatini, Sudan, South Sudan, and Costa Rica. We will be soon adding Haiti, probably before the end of this year, but with an aspiration to then target 50 UN member states with this global product, which essentially, as I mentioned, brings together the risk information across a very diverse community and puts it into the hands of end users. We recognize that a lot of the risk information that's being made available, even from the EO community, the providers of that information don't always know how it's being used at country level in various UN member states. So UNDRR is proposing to play that bridge function, that brokering function, to put this information into the hands of practitioners. Next slide, please. What we also see is that not only the nomenclature around risk and risk assessment and vulnerability and exposure, there's a need to strengthen both the standardization and harmonization of not only the terms we use, but how we actually organize information around hazards. I'm hoping colleagues in this call are familiar with the recent passage by the International Science Council of the hazard taxonomy and classification review that was done by UNDRR. That is an effort to bring the 302 hazard definitions into a common framework where we're speaking about types of floods, for example, that colleagues understand exactly what the nature of that hazard is, or if we're speaking about a cybersecurity risk or a biological hazard, that we're using the same language. So the National Risk Information Portal or platform, we're still deciding on the name, is providing that function where we will take all the risk information that we've been able to collect. So those 7 countries, now 9 countries that I mentioned, so far we've collected on average around 160 risk data sets for each country. And all of those will be amalgamated into this National Risk Information Portal. We are relying on open source risk information, on global sources of open source risk information. But we're not stopping there. I think the first generation of the portal or the platform will really demonstrate itself when we are able to upload the higher resolution and more granular risk information data sets that originate from these countries themselves. We all know risk assessments, whether they're from the EO community or UN partners are doing using drone technology, or other development partners are doing exposure studies on flood risk. That information usually sits as gray literature in various sector ministries, and there is no common platform at country level, or there's no, let's say, fully functional platform at country level in a lot of the countries that we're working in, where you're actually amalgamating and aggregating all this information and making it a one-stop clearinghouse of information. Next slide, please. So this is just a mock-up of the site. We will have a live prototype of the site by next month. It's being actively worked on by our coders and design team based in Bangkok. As I mentioned, it is a multi-purpose risk information clearinghouse. So what we're doing is trying to not only aggregate all the open source risk information, but to organize it in a way that from one country to the next, you can actually get a sense of what risk information is actually available in that country. And what I mean by that is both kind of the hazards of priority to that country, what work has been done on looking at exposure, what work has been done at looking at multiple levels of vulnerability to that particular hazard. We're drawing on UN, government, and third-party data sets. I see from the participant list that some of you are actually representatives of some of the organizations that we're pulling some of this information from. Because we're operating in countries with capacity challenges, we're designing this platform to be very low cost and have very low maintenance and operational requirements. As I say, we're not going to hardwire into this. You press a button and it gives you a risk profile of the country. Yes, it will certainly give you a risk narrative of the country, but how much of that will be automated in the platform is largely dependent on the risk information that we've been able to collect for each of these countries. Who do we think will use this? In terms of end users, we want to see sector ministries applying this risk information to sector planning. We want to see ministries of finance apply it to national budgeting. And I'm sorry for some of the acronyms in this slide. We want to see National Statistics Office start getting a better handle on their risk landscape. Also with UN members, some of those acronyms around the Resident Coordinator's Office and UN country teams. There's a lot of work already underway in a number of countries where risk information is usually managed by the National Disaster Management Agency or an information management working group. But by and large, they don't necessarily have this kind of open access forum. So what the use cases that we envisage will get stronger over time. This is a long-term initiative of UNDRR. This is in pursuit of the Sendai framework. It goes till 2030. We'll be supporting the rollout of the platform to 20 countries, to 50 countries and more. 50 countries we're committing to now. Our aspirational target of 100 countries is of course dependent on financial resources, but we're quite confident that the product we're developing and its linkage to the EO community, that the value will become very apparent in short order, particularly to national partners who are clamoring for more readily available access to risk information at country level. I'll stop there and very much look forward to benefiting from the inputs of participants on this call. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing the great work UNDR is doing using systemic risk information to strengthen countries' resilience to disasters. Our next speaker is Dave Borges. He is the co-chair of the GeoDR working group, and he's also a physical scientist with NASA. Dave, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Delali. Quick mic check. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thanks, Delali, Andrew, and Rui. You can go to the next slide, please. So with that brief background from Andrew on UNDRR's both the graph broadly and specifically the ongoing development of the RIP, the NRIP. We'll shift here for a second to speak from a geo perspective. I realize these pie charts are a little bit difficult to read, but I want to use them to paint a bit of a picture right now in terms of the geo work program. So if I go from left to right, top to bottom here, we can see that greater than 50% of the current geo work program 2020 through 2022 aligns with and or supports UNDRR's Sendai framework. And I'd back up really quickly here to provide a moment of context. our GeoDRR working group, along with the climate and capacity development working groups, built out a comprehensive and cross-disciplinary survey, which we distributed to the entire GeoWork program several months ago, towards the end of this past summer. And it had different thematic sections to include a dedicated one on disaster risk reduction. So these metrics are coming directly, and quite recently, as I said, just from a handful of months ago, directly from the current GeoWork program co-leads themselves. So back to these very quickly. Greater than 50% of the entire GeoWork program supports Sendai framework. However, greater than 50%, around 68%, are not aware of if multiple countries leverage their geo activities directly. Further, a large percentage are also not aware if their activities are mentioned in any national disaster risk reduction strategies. That question was, of course, drawn from the Sendai Framework Target E, which works to increase the number of nations that have disaster risk reduction strategies. And then from a geo perspective, of course, our working group is very interested in understanding where and to what extent are Earth observations included and or supporting national disaster risk reduction strategies. On the bottom row there, does your work program activity work directly with Sendai Framework national focal points? A large percentage answered no to that question. Working with disaster risk reduction practitioners, institutions, or national agencies was a much better split there. You can see in the middle on the bottom, but still 24 work program activities that indicated that they do support Sendai Framework were unaware if their work was leveraged directly by practitioners or agencies. And then finally, willingness to participate and contribute to our Earth Observations Risk Toolkit, which we are actively developing, was a very encouraging 57%. So over half of those that do align with or support Sendai Framework are interested in supporting this effort. So that was quite encouraging to receive. Next slide, please. What kind of set us on our journey, or at least set me to thinking about this quite some time ago, is if you go to GEO's website right now, this is essentially what you will see if you want to look at GEO's current work program. It has comprehensive information. Each one of these little boxes represents a work program activity. If you were to ask, though, what is the subset, the holistic subset of the GEO work program that supports disasters in a variety of different ways, that information does not currently exist right now. You would literally have to open up and read through the individual implementation plans for each individual GEO activity to understand and try and learn about their activities and if they're relevant to any interest that you may have in disaster risk reduction. Next slide, please. So as has been mentioned, that's really a fundamental driver in our working group choosing to develop an Earth Observations Risk Toolkit in development with UNDRR. And we went through most of the contents on this slide. Users are any who can use and benefit from GEO products that are suitable for their work, to include civil protection agencies at a national level, humanitarian actors, and of course Sendai national focal points, where those relationships exist and can be fostered. Next slide, please. So this is simply a conceptual rendering of our Earth Observations Risk Toolkit. We are actively building it right now, so it's not shareable currently. I will note the unique opportunity that our working group has right now, and hopefully with the support of many of those on the call right now, as Andrew said, UNDRR is active, and Andrew is leading efforts to actively develop their national risk information platform. So we are in a very unique and I think valuable place here to co-design an Earth Observations Risk Toolkit, which can serve two primary purposes: aggregate all of the different efforts across GEO globally right now that support disaster risk reduction, broadly speaking, and use this toolkit as a bridge to funnel all of those efforts directly into the UNDRR environment and expose all of these wonderful efforts, capabilities, tools, etc., to new audiences at national levels that are used to interacting with, say, directly with UNDRR, but do not live in our Earth observations community or space. And so the opportunity here to expose the ongoing efforts of the geo community to new audiences and direct users at national levels that are working to reduce risk, I think it's quite a valuable opportunity right now, and we're very excited about it. Next slide, please. So primary contents for the toolkit will be three things: use cases, policy briefs, as well as tools and technical guidance. We do not want to, and we are certainly not attempting to duplicate or take the place of any existing websites that GeoActivities might have, or existing tools, geospatial or otherwise. We simply want to serve as a clearinghouse where we can point to existing tools and build out with Geo Work Program Activity co-leads tangible use cases, as it says here, concrete examples of how those that are outside of the geo community are leveraging your activities to reduce risk at national or otherwise scales, as well as policy briefs and technical guidance here. Next slide, please. The working group internally is actively developing right now standardized methodologies for these three things, and those include actually a geo-wide standardized policy brief format. And our working group is actively working and will be releasing at some point in the coming calendar year thematically oriented policy briefs at the geo level. For example, some initial topics will likely include flooding and wildland fires. And the use cases themselves we will be developing standardized use case formats here, as you can see, summary, stakeholder impacts, methodology, results, challenges and constraints, and recommendations to ease the process of when we reach out to geo program activities asking, can we work with you? Can we help develop these use cases? And can we highlight the wonderful work that you're doing on the EO Risk Toolkit? Next slide, please. This is just one example. And I will note that our working group is in active conversations and has been for some time with quite a list now and a growing list of work program activities. This is simply to serve as an example. Some here may be familiar with this story, and it's just an excellent story right now. But in November 2022, significant tropical cyclones, a Category 4 and a Category 5, landfalled in Central America, and in particular in Honduras. And the Honduran National Electric Energy Company, or INE, who runs a very large hydroelectric dam in country, was very concerned with the first hurricane, Ida, landfall. It essentially pushed the capabilities of the hydroelectric dam almost to its breaking point, and they were very concerned about it. And then not 1 week later, more or less, a second significant hurricane landfalled in almost the exact same spot. And in between those two events, this national authority, INE, ended up reaching out and working directly with the GeoGlows initiative, which does streamflow forecasting leveraging ECMWF. And a partnership was quickly formed, and INE was able to regulate the discharge of floodwaters from the hydroelectric dam directly based on GeoGlows streamflow forecasts, and literally avoided significant infrastructure damage to their hydroelectric dam there. So this is simply an example of what it's a great example. We realize that capturing examples like this widely, I'm well aware, capturing user feedback is not a straightforward task. It's a difficult thing to do, but the GeoDRR working group wants to work across the GeoWork program to build out these use cases and highlight them in the risk toolkit. Next slide, please. This is just this is not a comprehensive list, but this is I just listed here some of the ongoing activities that certainly have disaster risk reduction footprints within GEO. Right now, we have ongoing conversations with many of these, and it just serves as an example list of some of those that we're aware of, and hope to learn about more opportunities in the dialogue portion of this meeting to come. Next and last slide, please. So looking ahead, so everybody has a general understanding of where we are at now. This is a sneak preview because obviously the toolkit is not ready yet, but we wanted to take advantage of the platform that Geo Week offers to update the community about where we are at right now. And you can see in this Gantt chart, essentially our target public launch of the toolkit right now is UNDRR's 7th session for the global platform for disaster risk reduction in 2022 at the end of May. Working backwards from that, you can see that the next step is initial toolkit hub development. Our working group are working directly with Andrew and his IT staff and others to gain access. We are using taking advantage of Esri's Geo Associate membership and their support offered to leverage an Esri hub as the backbone for the EO risk toolkit. And so we'll be building out an initial framework for it, and then very importantly, there in the middle is a user co-design stage. We're very set on, from really as early as is feasible, working in a co-design way directly with end users, so that we bake that into the development of the toolkit itself. That's very important. And then target audience testing, and then launching, as I said, at the global platform in May. So that's our current timeline right now. And I think we can move on to the next portion of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave, for building on Andrew's presentation to show how EO tools and services developed or being developed by the Geo Working Program builds into the UNDR work and DR in general. After those two very insightful presentations, we'll now begin the question and answer segment, and as well as discussion. If you would like to put your questions, so far there are no questions in the chat section. However, you can raise your hand if you would like to ask a question and you will be moved on stage so that you could have the microphone to ask your question orally. And to moderate this discussion are mainly two people, and will be supported by a third. The first is Kenny Nkobe, who is the co-chair of the DRR, of the GeoDRR working group. He's an experienced researcher and practitioner in adaptive social protection issues. The second is also Nathaniel Newlands. He's also a co-chair of the subgroup 2, and he's a research scientist with the government of Canada. The third person who will be supporting Kenny and Nathaniel is Ryan Langclaws. Ryan is representing Esri as a key partner of the EO Risk Toolkit in providing technical support. He will be standing by to respond to any technical questions you may have, and they are ready for your questions right now. Kenny, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Delali, and thank you everyone who's participated so far in this. I'm sorry, I'm speaking from Nigeria at the moment. I experienced a serious blackout, so please, I'll leave my video camera muted. So would like to see which of us have the answers we have to the polls, and we're starting with the first one. Let's try to find out, what part of the world are you in? Could we get the answers to that from the polls that were
Can
published?
everyone see the screen and the poll result?
Yes,
I think
you can see
we're
it,
looking
Ray.
at the results.
Can you see it, Kine?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
So,
Okay, good.
yeah.
So none of, I mean, except for you, none, I mean, no
Yeah.
other people from Africa, unfortunately, or CIS, but many from
Okay.
Europe and America. So let's move on. I mean, I'm gonna have the second one.
Yes. So, is anyone from or working with the graph pilot countries, maybe as candidates or from the any of the small island development countries as well? The graph pilot countries, by the way, include Sudan, Somalia, Eswatini, Costa Rica, Bangladesh, and Pakistan and Fiji. And those that are specified earlier within the graph pilot candidates are Vietnam and Philippines, Haiti, Maldives, and the others. So, Delali, do we have
It's
Rui? Do we have any
yeah, it's
answers there?
great. Yeah. Can you see? Can you all see the results? So it's great that we have two yes to the graph
Mhm.
pilot countries. We want to hear from
Yeah.
them later in the discussion.
Okay.
I guess Nathaniel will address that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay.
actually,
So,
one vote. I mean, actually, three votes for the graph pilots, and the one vote from for the candidates. So it's great.
yeah.
We want to at least hear from the four people later.
Yeah.
So I'll move on to the next one.
Yeah. The
So the
third
third
one.
one. Yeah.
Yes. How would you describe yourself in terms of Earth observation?
We might have lost Kine.
Oh no, we might have
Kine, are
lost
you there?
Kine. Rui, I can only see in what you're sharing on the screen. I only see what my answers to the polls. I don't know
Really?
if that's,
Okay. Maybe
I
I
don't know if
have
that's the
to.
case for others.
Maybe I have to close the
There we
Okay,
go.
poll.
that's it.
I think you
There
do
we
have to
go.
close the poll. Yes,
I
yeah.
closed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Okay,
right.
Diali, just help me
Yeah.
close all the polls.
Okay.
Yeah. I somehow, yeah, I should have publicized it. Anyway, so maybe I'll move on. Involvement in the GeoWork program activities. Can you all see?
WP activities.
Yeah.
38. Okay. Great.
That's five
votes
votes.
there.
Yeah, we want to hear from them.
So we'll be happy to hear from you in the discussion sessions.
And
Give
the
some
last one.
examples of this. And then the last one. If you are involved in the current or next GWP activities, 25 votes. That's 2 votes. Okay.
With mature tools. Great.
So,
yeah.
we'd
So
also love to
anyway,
hear from them, isn't it?
yeah. So I'm just gonna close the poll results and let you move on to the discussion questions. Kine.
But before we if I see that we have an interesting question right in the chat.
Yeah.
Could we so Ricardo Cuerga, who leads the AmeriGeo Disasters Working Group, asked, what do you think needs to be the role of the disasters regional the regional geodisasters working groups, of which there's variations, work groups, or task groups in all of, I think, all 5 regional geos. Or is this going directly to countries through UNDRR? I might ask Andrew, from a UNDRR perspective. So you have UNDR is in process or has hired in country liaisons in the target graph countries already. What is the interface there between the regional leads for UNDR, like for the Americas, for instance, between the UNDR headquarters in Geneva, regional, and then in country? Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I think that would be interesting to.
Certainly. Thanks for the question. Let me just decipher it a little bit, because what we're developing as the national risk information platform. So what UNDR has done is, as Dave mentioned, is we've recruited what we call national risk officers. By and large, those officers could either be embedded in the disaster management agency, they could be embedded in a UN agency, depending on which of the GRAF countries we're referring to. There is no one size fits all, but the view is, as we start aggregating this risk information and making it more readily available to users, and I should have mentioned during my presentation, the release of the platform is accompanied by a series of training modules where we're going to be assembling national users and have tailored training. So if you are a data scientist in government or in the research community in those countries, we will actually have be releasing tailored training on how to use the portal to that community, versus if you are from the Department of Planning and the Transport Ministry or the Health Ministry or the energy utility, the training on the portal and how to use the portal will differ. The view really is that this should be ultimately a nationally owned platform where regional organizations fit in. And we've had these conversations with different regional economic commissions, but also regional organizations like SPC or SPC in the Pacific or ECOWAS in West Africa. We very much see the longevity of this as a service that regional organizations should provide, but they are not necessarily equipped to kind of accelerate the collection of this risk information. So let me cite the example of Costa Rica. There, we've assembled around 165 roughly data sources on various hazards for Costa Rica from publicly available sources, JRC, NASA, GEM, other organizations, MDAT, OCHA, Inform Index. Again, amalgamating this and putting it in one-stop clearing shop. But the more important, as important rather, piece is that through this process with national partners, they are also knocking on doors of sector ministries and have now collected 70, I think, and counting risk data sets to be uploaded to the portal. So this is where we see the value of it, this virtuous cycle, where yes, we work through regional organizations and try to sunlight the risk information that they themselves have collected and make that more readily available to end users at country level. But again, the value of the portal increases over time, where you have more kind of granularity on the richness of the information that's actually uploaded to the system. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, Dave, I think that answers your question, isn't it, Dave?
Yes, I think so. Thank you for elaborating on that, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So, does that in any way also address the first question, or then we can have an elaborate discussion about what we think on the plan of the EU risk toolkit so far? Do we have any questions or comments or suggestions around this from participants, please?
Kine, we have an interesting question in the comments from
okay.
Lucas Wimmer.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that yet.
Would you like me to read it out?
Yes, please read it out, please. Yeah.
Okay. My RS working group and I work in a German-Bangladesh international cooperation project to implement geodata on ground motion, inundation or river course changes into Bangladesh urban planning. We also create technical guides and do capacity building. Is
It
there a
also
way?
says we also create technical guides and do capacity building, isn't it?
Yeah. So his last question is there a way to contribute as a use case?
All right. Yes. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, just my thoughts quickly maybe on that. So as I think was conveyed during the presentation, the focus of our GeoDRR working group right now is on the work program, and the activities contained within. I think though I think we'll probably need to have a bit more discussion, but when very interesting and I think highly relevant examples like this, we become aware of them, like Lucas has shared. I mean, just bottom line, I suppose I would love for our working group to work with the Federal Institute to build out, I think, a highly relevant sounding use case like this. And it just, we would need to, perhaps it is aligned or tangentially aligned with an existing GeoWork program activity. Perhaps we frame it in the context of actual geo-national members, in this case, I believe Germany. So I think that there's certainly we just need to. I think it's a framing question. I think we very much would welcome a conversation with you, Lucas, to examine it further.
Nathaniel here. I was just going to add, I think it would also be useful for sort of testing our standardization, our templates for the use case, and making sure that it covers what we need on the design. So
And
thanks,
the
Nathan.
next geo work program is now been sort of been on a call. So here's a chance like they can Lucas can join the effort to shape the next work program. I mean, that would be the easiest. If not, I mean, he can get involved and still somehow. I mean, the geo work program activities are supposed to be open, for collaboration. So even if you miss the first train, there are more to go. So
one other interesting suggestion would be that Lucas can also try to be, if not already, in any of the work groups of interest, don't you think?
He needs to be recommended. I mean, recommended
his
by
organization.
I mean the geo, the representative. But I mean, it's easy. It should be easy, I think. Yes.
By the way, Lucas, thank you very much for your question, and I do hope you have got some breadth of information.
He's on the stage. If he can quickly comment or.
Yeah, thank you for all the replies. And I think we from the Federal Agency of Geoscience and Natural Resources in Germany, we are already in discussion how to contribute to geo and to the local geo group in Germany. So that is how we heard about this GeoRisk tool from the beginning.
That's wonderful news, Lucas. I suspect.
Indeed. Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Kine, please. Sorry.
No. Please go ahead. You can finish up with what you're saying.
Okay. I suspected as much, Lucas. I know we've been working quite closely and really appreciate both Layla and Fabian's contributions through the Earth observations for Sendai monitoring community activity. But Kine, we are at time for our session, so perhaps we wrap up and thank everybody for attending and suggest that we're always available via email, which all of our contact information is available on Geo's website at our DRR working group webpage.
I think we still have 6 minutes, so let's quickly go over the question 2. So the question 2 was which
what
tools and
DRR
services?
related tools or services developed by GWP activities are available and has already been used. In other words, do you have potential contents for the use cases, policy briefs, or technical guidance of this? So is anyone willing to come forward who has any of this? You can let us know. You can put that in the chat. While I'll
Let us
hand over
know.
to Nathaniel. Yes, Nathaniel,
Exactly.
please.
Sure. Okay. I have an easy monitoring task because we only have a few minutes, but I definitely encourage you to look at the three questions 3 and 4. So tying in with what Andrew and others have discussed and presented today, do you work with or are you from graph pilot countries that have Kenny mentioned, or are small island developing states as well? If so, how can we work together? So we're interested in your ideas and feedback. Yeah, thanks very much. So there listed are the countries. And I would say get in contact with the Geo Secretariat or David, myself, or Kenny. And then the fourth question, does anyone have any other suggestions for collaborations? So this might be for existing, or as Ruer was pointing out, for future geo work planning, by integrating different data from multiple activities to help countries address systemic risks. So the interconnected systemic risks.
Danielle, I see you've raised your hand. Please go ahead.
How do I hold on.
I've handed him the mic, so he should be on stage now. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you very much for the clarification of the toolkit. And we, as a Human Planet Initiative, will be willing to contribute with exposure data, both built up settlements and population. And this is over 40 years and 50 years, which is clearly a risk factor and a systemic risk factor. Yeah, I will just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. That's excellent. Anyone else?
Can we
have a few minutes?
Yeah, can we hear who are the people involved in the graph countries and graph
Good
pilot
idea.
countries?
Yep.
Yeah. Because we have what which one was it?
You've
Let me
raised
just trying
hands.
to get the answer.
You gotta
Yeah.
raise
Raise
be
hands
shy.
or speak up or put in the chat. Because we have at least 4 people. I mean, maybe they left. I don't know. I hope not. Which countries and who you are, so we can hopefully work together. Do we see anyone like, raise any hands? So
maybe there's a way we can follow up with attendees.
Yeah. I don't know. So just we will make sure that we have and I guess Dave, Dave, Nathaniel, Kinemi, and Delali will put our email addresses in the chat. So, and anyone who can, who wants to get in touch and work with us can contact.
Okay, Ring, can I take over now?
Sure.
Yes, so I think perhaps it's the end of the day for quite the audience joining from Europe and America. No, Europe and Africa. So perhaps that's why the enthusiasm seems to be down. But please feel free to reach out to the email addresses that are being put in the chat, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. On that note, after an interesting 1-hour discussion, we hope you now have some quality insights into the EORIX toolkit being developed. And we'll be looking forward to your feedback and especially your ideas about potential content from the GeoWorking program activities. Thank you so much for your time and have a good evening or good day, wherever you are. Bye.
Thank you, Layla. Do we want to also mention that this session will be running again?
Yes. Thank you so much for that reminder. So the session would run again tomorrow, Friday, the 26th of November from 11 to 11:50 Central European Time. So we hope to see you then. Maybe by that time you'd have more interesting ideas about how you can collaborate and bring up content on the Geo Working Program activities, because we would really want to hear from you. We want to make the toolkit relevant, useful, and also we will even want to come up with some policy briefs, which they spoke about, so that we can target the two different audience that we have in EU, both the decision makers and then the practitioners as well. So thank you so much.